Now, last week, the BBC, quite rightly, lavished unstinting praise and boundless coverage on the commemorative services for the D-Day landings at Normandy. The sense of reverence, even awe, was palpable. Just days later, as those same veterans got home, the BBC had a surprise for them. The days of free TV licences were over. All but the poorest 75-year-old and above will be stripped of the perk they've enjoyed for nearly 20 years, as the corporation pleaded poverty and said it was the only way to make £500 million worth of cuts required, save for closing a raft of TV or radio stations. Well, that excuse is just beebing nonsense. Here's where savings could be made. An £87 million new set for EastEnders, that's mere vanity. The £1 billion new London HQ that was censured for being £107 million over budget, and the 2,700 staff who got pay rises of over 10%. The BBC used to be nicknamed Auntie. Regrettably, it is now more like a money-grubbing relative trying to bump off Grandad.
Nick, I think you've missed the whole point of the thing. The point of it is, this is a government... This was a government decision.
Which the BBC called a good deal upon signing.
Exactly.
Greg, the BBC said this is a good deal less than 5 years ago, and now they're charging €90.
Let's go back. The government tried to do this twice. The first time they tried to do it, the Director-General and the Chairman both threatened to resign if they did it, and it disappeared. The second time they did it, they didn't do it. Now, the government must have known that the BBC would do exactly what they've done, that they would look after the...
Should Lord Hall have threatened to resign?
Oh, yes, at the time, yes. I think Lord Hall and the chairman of the BBC and the BBC government should have said, we're not doing this. We are not appointed as governors of the BBC to decide social policy in this country. That's what you're elected for. That's what you're there for. And I think to see the Prime Minister this week saying the BBC have done the wrong thing, it's her fault. It's their fault. They shouldn't have done... How the BBC... I mean, you've gone through a list of things...
And there's tons more, which I won't bore you, but there are many more.
But they're nothing like the scale of the money that's going to be... would have been lost. I mean, 20% of all the money that would have gone to the BBC would have been lost.
Are you still arguing in favour of this?
I'm arguing that they had no choice.
No, but they did sign off on the deal, a good deal.
Yes, but the good deal gave them the right to make the decision they made this week.
Rachel.
I think the BBC's done exactly the right thing. I can't understand... I mean, why bring D-Day veterans into this?
Why?
If they are...
Because they're the poor souls who are going to suffer.
Sadly, there are very few of those...
Oh, that makes it all right, then,
surviving, and I hope that if they want to claim pension credit, they should get their free TV licence. But what... The BBC had absolutely no option. We are in an ageing society where the rich are disproportionately richer than the young. Why should Generation Rent subsidise the baby boomers who can easily afford £154.50?
Hear differently from
no, can I just say,
one last point,
I have found it... all the other broadcasters who obviously quite rightly resent the licence... what's it called? The licence fee. I forgot the licence fee, because arguably it is a tax.
It is, of course, it's a tax. You go to jail.
So the BBC has got to look at the whole subscription model. What we've got to do is get rid of the licence fee and move to a proper subscription model. But while we have the licence fee, it's only fair.
No,
those who can afford it should pay for it.
We've got to bust this myth that old people are wealthy now. There's a very small percentage of old people that have money. A third of all... Let me finish. You just had a lot. A third of all pensioners in this country depend solely on the state pension. The Joseph Rowntree Foundation did a report last year. 1 in 6 pensioners in this country live in poverty. That's a 33% increase over the past decade. No, they can't, Richard,
because they want pension credit.
No, pension credits are massively underclaimed, and you ought to know that. And they're massively underclaimed because a lot of old people live on their own. No, let me finish. They don't know how to do it. They're massively underclaimed.
Can I just say something?
And then we ask get June in. Rachel?
I talked to a BBC, somebody who actually was part of the decision to charge pensioners again, and he said part of the problem is that the government is actually going to have to pay the cost because so many pensioners are now going to charge pension credit, and so the whole thing is going to devolve back to the taxpayer.
June.
I just think we're forgetting the humanity of this whole thing.
Exactly.
You know, for a lot of old people that are on their own, the BBC or television is their
and radio
is their only access to the outside world.
Totally.
And you know what? You're talking about the baby boomers having money and so on. I think they've earned it. You know what? If you've lived for 75 years, you've paid into the system. I'm sorry, you deserve to have
that was the decision
license
that the Labour government took when they first gave free licence fees, which is fine. That was fine. If they wanted, if it was a government, an elected government's decision that they wanted older people over 75 to have a free licence, fine.
Yes.
What they then did is push this to the governors of the BBC and said, you've got to make that decision. Well, they were inevitably going to make the decision they've taken.
Are the BBC seriously going to start prosecuting 80 and 90-year-old men and women?
If you drill down into all the benefits for the older people, from bus passes to winter fuel allowance, they are all electoral bribes to the
voters. It doesn't even matter if they are,
to the older voters who vote proportionately
Let's come back to the BBC aspect.
But even if they
I know you, like
they've
me,
earned it.
like to go through the TV listings. Greg Dyke, the BBC One's budget is over £1 billion. BBC Two's is just under 400, so that's £1.5 billion. Now, what have we got on? Oh, here we are, a repeat at 11 o'clock, BBC One. A1's Britain's Longest Road, followed by Caught Red-Handed, a repeat, followed by Bargain Hunt, a repeat.
Followed
by... It's all repeats. If I paid my TV licence last year, I should get this year free. It's all a repeat.
This is such nonsense.
It's all repeats.
This is money that will go into programming.
Can I bring in a clip from Tom Watson, because I think the point he makes is totally spot on in terms of the Tory government and how they reneged on their promise.
The government made a solemn promise to 3 million pensioners that they wouldn't do this. In their manifesto in 2017, they said they would guarantee the free TV licence for the duration of this Parliament until 2022. So this represents not just a devolving of policy that central government should be dealing with, but it's also a betrayal of pensioners and represents a lie in the last Tory manifesto.
I think they've been let down both by the government and by the governors of the BBC.
Then they shouldn't have signed the deal.
We did ask the BBC to comment, as we must, and they came in response to your intro.
Oh, good.
They say, one, the set of EastEnders was built in 1984 and only intended for use for 2 years. Over 30 years later, the show remains one of the BBC's flagship programmes and yet is filming from a set that is no longer fit for purpose. They then say serious mistakes were made in the first phase of the Broadcasting House project. Licence fee payers were let down. And finally, they say, and while there are strict rules around any pay increases, it's only right that when people are promoted or take on extra responsibilities, it's reflected in their salary.
I love the fact that you've read that. First, you'd have had to sanction it a few years ago.
The stuff about the EastEnders, OK, yes, they had to have a new set, but the original budget was 52 million, and it ended up being 87 billion. But the point is, their annual budget is 5 billion. 2.4 billion of that goes on programming. The rest goes on admin, management,
pensions,
and salaries and pensions. And that's where they need to put their house in order. They can make the savings they need on the TV licences by putting their own house in order. I know from personal events, their pension scheme was dramatically changed at least 15 years ago.
You've seen the papers today.
Yes, you've seen
it's a £2 billion black hole. £200 million a year will have to go. But don't worry, we'll tax 90-year-old war veterans.
That's almost every pension fund in this country has got a black hole like that, if you measure it in a certain way.
Yeah, but that 90-year-old can't watch telly or listen to the radio unless he or she has a licence. That's what's so
But also,
different.
Nick, it's such a shot in the foot because, you know, it's an own goal by the BBC because the 90-year-old is the majority of their audience.
Yes.
So it makes no sense whatsoever.
But the reality is they took this decision 3 years ago, they and the government, or 4 years ago, and it was a mistake.
Thank you.
It was a mistake. They should have said to the government, we cannot make, we as the governors of the BBC cannot make this sort of decision. That's what you're elected for.